makers, Lisa here from Andrie Designs. I've had a few people recently ask me how I baste my fabric panels to my sew-in foam. So I thought I'd pop a quick little video together for you to show you exactly what I do and what I find works best. So I'm working on the Hangabout toiletry bag pattern, and in this video I will be showing you one of the outer panels, and I'll show you how to baste this gorgeous kitty cat fabric to the sew-in foam. So I hope this video helps. I hope that you pick up a few little tips and tricks, and let's get started. Okay, so as I said earlier, this video is just a quick little rundown to show you how to baste a fabric panel to a piece of sew-in foam. So I'm making the Hangabout toiletry bag at the moment, and I'm using this gorgeous cat fabric. It's called Whiskers and Tails 2 Cat Circles in Black by Robert Kaufman. Now I actually grabbed this fabric from Voodoo Rabbit Fabric down in Brisbane, and I'll pop a link to their shop in the show notes for those of you who are interested in it. So I've already cut out one of my outer panels, and I've already fused the interfacing to the back as per the pattern directions. Because this fabric is somewhat directional, I wanted to make sure that I remember which is the top and which is the bottom when I come to assemble my bag. When I fused the interfacing, I wrote on the back of it a T for top. However, once I baste this to my foam, I'm not going to be able to see that T. So what I've done is I've used my tailor's chalk and I've marked a small little white T up the center within the seam allowance on the right side of the fabric, just so that I remember which side is the top. I've also roughly cut out my sew-in foam, and I just use the by Annie's sew-in foam, which I really love. I find it really easy to work with. It gives a really nice finish, and I probably use it for 90 to 95% of my bags. So taking your fabric panel with interfacing fused, all you're going to do is pop it right side up on top of your piece of foam. Now it doesn't matter that the edges of the foam might poke out, we're going to trim that later. What you want to do is gently but firmly from the center of your panel flatten the fabric out in both directions, so vertically up and down and horizontally up and down, to make sure that your fabric panel is sitting nice and flat on top of your foam. You don't want to stretch your fabric panel to fit the foam, because that's not going to give a very good finish at the end of your bag, and it's actually going to make or mean that your bag turns out of shape somewhat, because typically it's easier to cut your fabric pieces accurately as per the pattern pieces rather than the foam. We will trim the excess foam off later. So making sure your fabric is nice and flat on top of the foam, I'm going to use wonder clips. You can use pins as well. Clip in the center top, and making sure it's nice and flat down, clip at center bottom. Repeat that process on the sides, so center of one side, make sure it's nice and flat across, and center of the other side. Now some people would be happy with just the 4 clips. I like to pop a few more on just to make sure it's really held in place prior to basting. So I'm going to pop one near each corner, so I don't have to worry about it possibly shifting out of place when I stitch it. So, I'm going to pop this one in here. And there we have it. So our fabric is nicely clipped onto the foam and ready to be basted at the machine. So let's pop over to the machine and I'll show you how to baste around it. Okay, so at your sewing machine you want to have your stitch length on the largest it will go. So on this machine it's approximately 5 mil, so crank that all the way up to the top. I like to always have my needle in this set down position, just so that it holds everything in place when I stop. Holding onto your thread, I always have a scrap colour in. I just use whatever I've got that I'm not really using much, to be honest. So at the moment I've got orange. Your thread does not have to coordinate with your fabric at all, because at the end of the day you're not going to see this stitching at all, and half of it, if not all of it, will get trimmed off anyway. So just lowering your foot. You want to stitch as per the pattern directions. For most of mine it's approximately 1/4 inch seam allowance in from the edge, and I just like to stitch back and forward once or twice just to secure the thread, and then literally you're just stitching around the outside with that long stitch length using approximately a 1/4 inch seam. I should say that the seam allowance that you use to stitch or baste your fabric to your foam does not matter as long as it's less than the seam allowance of the pattern. So for my patterns, they have a 1/2 inch seam allowance built into them. So as long as you don't stitch wider than a 1/2 inch, you're not going to see these stitches, which is what you want at the end of your project. You don't want to see these stitches. So as long as you're under that 1/2 inch, that's why I recommend stitching at 1/4 inch. Then you're nice and safe in that zone and you won't see the stitching once your project is finished. Oop, there goes a peg, a clip. And when you get to the end, just reverse once and forward just to secure your threads, and then you can remove your panel and trim off your threads. And that means our fabric is nicely basted to our foam. We've only got one more step to go, so we'll pop back to the cutting table and finish off. Okay, so back at your cutting table, all you're going to need for this step is your trusty rotary cutter or a pair of scissors or snips if that's what you prefer. And all you're going to do is cut around the outer edge of your fabric using your cutter or scissors to trim off the excess foam that you can see poking out the edge. Now the excess foam is because when we cut our foam piece out, we cut it out roughly because, as I said earlier, given its thickness, it is quite difficult to cut it and get it perfectly accurate as per the pattern piece. So this is the point where it's good to just tidy things up in preparation for your seams further down the track. So I like to take my cutter and I like to cut in on about a 45-degree angle. Instead of going straight down, I actually almost like to undercut the foam slightly, which really gives the fabric that edge. It means the fabric is the edge and there's no foam in the way, so that when you further down the track, when you assemble your pieces, it's very easy to line up the fabric pieces because the foam is out of the way, so to speak. So just working around the edges as you go, cutting in on a sort of 45-degree angle. I just like to roll it around. Now's a good time to get rid of those spare threads. And just working around, slightly undercutting as you go. Around those corners. And along straight. So you're not trimming anything off the fabric itself. You're just trimming off any excess foam so that the edge of the fabric is really clear, and it makes it a lot easier when you come to assemble your bag further down the track. And back to the start. So then just having a look, looks pretty good. I could probably take a bit more off there. That looks pretty good. I'll take a bit more off the bottom. So I want the fabric to be the edge. You don't want the foam to be the edge. And there we have it. So that's all done and ready to be assembled. So that is how I baste my fabric pieces to my sew-in foam, and how I then trim the edges in preparation for assembly later on. And that's all there is to it. You now have a beautifully basted fabric and foam panel ready to assemble into your bag. I hope this video has been helpful. I hope you've learnt some new little tips and tricks. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. You can grab yourself a copy of the Hangabout toiletry bag pattern from my website, which is www.andriedesigns.com. And until next time, happy sewing!